Welcome to Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we discuss Trump 2.0's policies and politics and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. As Taiwan and the U.S. signed a landmark trade and investment deal centered on semiconductors, today's episode dives into one of Taiwan's most sensitive yet least understood strategic questions: how the island can keep the lights on, stay competitive in the global supply chain, and still reach net zero emissions. My guest is Bart Linssen, an experienced energy expert who spent 20 years helping Taiwan grow its onshore wind power industry, giving him a front-row view of how politics, business, and local communities collide over every turbine and solar panel. We discuss why Taiwan still relies heavily on coal and LNG, especially during Trump 2.0, what really happened with the nuclear power plant shutdown in 2025, how global initiatives like RE100 and Europe's carbon border tax are reshaping decisions in Taipei, and why promising renewable projects keep getting stuck in partisan crossfire. Let's hear Bart's perspective. All right, so welcome, Bart. Thank you so much for joining us today. You're kind of a guest because there's a lot we want to cover on Taiwan's energy ground, and you've been living there for a long time, but just tell us your history in Taiwan.
Thanks, first of all, for having me here. Very happy to talk about Taiwan's energy situation. I came to Taiwan about 30 years ago, initially working for a Taiwanese company, an engineering company, and later moving into uninterruptible power supplies. So we did a lot of business with the semiconductor industry, which are very dependent on reliable power. And when the opportunity arose in Taiwan, eventually, when renewable energy started to be developed, I jumped into onshore wind, and I've been working at a onshore wind manufacturer called Enercon, based in Germany, and I've been responsible for the last 15 years to take care of the installation and servicing and maintenance of their turbines. So most of my experience and background is in onshore wind in Taiwan, and that's also where I'm quite familiar with the general energy landscape in Taiwan.
Well, you mentioned that you kind of jump into this business when Taiwan started to talk about renewable energy. Approximately when was that? Just a brief history. Yeah, a brief history of how Taiwan started, thinking about renewable energy.
To my knowledge, the first initiatives, like from the government side, to go and explore this and promote this was at the time that President Chen Shui-bian was elected. So the first president that came from the opposition party, the DPP, and they had
The 2000s, right?
That was around 2000, 2002. And my understanding is that they were the ones to initiate the conversation, in particular with European developers, and looked for their interest to develop wind farms and solar in Taiwan. So over the following years, 2002 to 2008, this progressed, and I joined Enercon in 2008, and that was the time that you saw quite extensive construction, in particular of onshore wind. So there was a lot going on in that time. And so that's where these initial efforts to get the developers here actually came to life, and where you saw the actual onshore wind getting going in operation. And a similar story for solar, although solar is somewhat more local. So there's been local manufacturing of solar panels, but they have also been initiated and encouraged starting from somewhere around 2002.
I'll give people a breakdown of Taiwan's current usage of power. In my understanding, still largely the traditional power, not renewable. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. For a very long time, the focus has been on producing electricity cheaply and in large quantities, basically. So the focus has been initially by the government on partly on nuclear, but mainly on coal. So there's a large installed base of coal power production in Taiwan, and up to recently over 50% of the electricity was produced by coal. It means that electricity was kind of cheap and affordable. At the same time, it also led to a lot of air pollution in Taiwan. So the air quality, in particular by the extensive burning of coal, was not good. A little bit of background here too. I think that is important for the listener to know. Taiwan's electricity, basically a government monopoly. So it's Taiwan Power company that is responsible for the production and the distribution and the sales of electricity. So the price of electricity is very much government controlled. They have released parts of production in particular in the early 90s because Tai Power was not able to build out coal and gas-fired power plants fast enough. The government introduced the concept of independent power producers. So these were private businesses that were had long-term contracts with Tai Power at a fixed rate, but at a variable rate according to a formula which would define the price of the electricity that they produce with coal and gas. So this was a first step towards some privatization. And for renewables, this has been opened even further. So you see that there are two structures there. So private companies can build and operate renewable energy facilities. They can then choose between either a feed-in tariff that is defined on a yearly basis by the government, which is the fee that Tai Power will pay to this private operator, and usually is fixed for a duration for 20%. Or they can go and sign a CPPA, a corporate power purchase agreement, and then it's up to the market on what this producer will get for the electricity that he produces. And this setup has been necessary in particular for renewable energy because much of Taiwan's supply chain, and let's give me an example of TSMC, have a requirement to manufacture due to their position in the supply chain to manufacture with 100% renewable energy. So for Tai Power to do that, they must have the option to purchase this renewable energy directly from the suppliers. This was introduced somewhere in 2018, which has forced the government to open up at least the renewable energy market to for these kind of private power purchasing contracts. So it's a bit of a complicated setup.
Yeah, but who is requiring the TSMC has to use renewable energy?
There will be companies like Apple. Apple has an agreement or an obligation or has promised under RE100 to produce everything with 100% renewable energy. So as a supplier to Apple, TSMC will have that obligation again as well. And it's also interesting to add there, because that is something that's a discussion that we may have on nuclear later, that under RE100, nuclear is not considered
Clean energy.
So it's renewable energy 100. It's 100% energy by renewable source.
I was a little bit surprised when you say that 50% of Taiwan's power was still produced by burning coal. And what are the other sources of energy? Oil, natural gas, nuclear?
Yeah, right. So oil, natural gas, and renewable energy is slowly coming up. Nuclear has just been switched off. So since May, the last nuclear power plant has been closed. Electricity production is mainly LNG and coal, and then we have somewhere around 10% contribution by renewable energy.
And among the renewables, what are the main types?
Traditionally, the widely seen renewable energy currently, also because this is something that is produced locally, is solar energy. According to the numbers that I just checked, we're at around 20 gigawatts of installed capacity. So that is the biggest source still of renewable energy. What is coming up quickly is offshore wind. This has been very much pushed by the central government as a way to quickly add renewable production capacity. It has initially been quite successful in that we are now at 3 gigawatts. Target is actually 5 gigawatt for this year, so we're behind, and the eventual target is 20 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity for maybe we later.
What about others? Hydro?
What obstacles are? Sorry.
Yeah, what about other types? Hydro?
There are a couple of others. So onshore wind was an early wind energy mover in Taiwan. So it was successful between 2008 and I would say 2015. Around that time, we started to see more opposition from residents. It's quite complicated to develop onshore wind in a country like Taiwan. So I looked it up. It's roughly the size of the state of Maryland in the US, and it has 23 million people, all basically living on the West Coast because the East Coast is high mountains. So it's very crowded, and it's rather difficult to find proper locations for onshore wind. That's one reason. The second reason for onshore wind having difficulty is that it's a very political, it's very easy to become politicized when you start the development of these projects. I think somewhat similar to what you see in the US. The topics are very bipartisan. You are KMT and you support nuclear and not really renewable energy, or you're a DPP, you're green and you support renewable energy, but you don't want nuclear. And the discussions are often more emotional and political than that they are rational. In my opinion, we probably need both to the maximum extent to make our carbon reduction.
Let's talk about it. Since you brought it up, nuclear power has been a controversial issue for decades. It's always been the DPP's position for more than 30 years against nuclear power. And why is that, if you can kind of help people understand?
This is also something that I actually had to look that up because I've seen that happening in particular after the Fukushima accident. But if you look back in history, there has been concerns already since the accident at Chernobyl. So the argument is that Taiwan is a earthquake-prone area. The nuclear power plants have also been built quite close to very populated cities. So Taiwan has 4 nuclear power plants, of which the 4th one has never been finished. 3 of these are very close to Taipei City. It's 20 kilometers from it. And then there's one in the south. So I think that the proximity to these very populated cities has fed the concern that there is a risk there. And eventually that involved, when this attention to renewable energy came, the discussion when renewable energy was promoted by the government, it was positioned as an alternative to nuclear. So if we use renewable, we can switch off the nuclear energy production. And that's exactly what happened. So we've expanded renewables, but we've switched off all the nuclear power plants. I would have rather seen that we would have positioned renewables against the coal-fired power plants that we had, which contributed a lot to Taiwan's air pollution and also to Taiwan's carbon emissions.
So you're saying the main reason for the current ruling party, DPP, to be so against nuclear power is solely because of safety issue. And the KMT has traditionally taken a position that is less antagonistic towards nuclear power. Is that right? Because, I mean, I remember during Ma Ying-jeou's time, that was when it was first decided not to continue using nuclear power, right? Especially after the tsunami in Japan.
Right. So yeah, safety considerations, I believe, have fed into much of what resulted that worry about nuclear energy.
So my question is, I didn't feel like it's so partisan, even though it was started by the DPP as a safety issue, right? But it sounds like it was during Ma Ying-jeou's time, the KMT time, that when they first decided to shut down the nuclear power plant. So it is both parties. It's not just the DPP.
Yeah, possibly fed by public opinion on the topic. So yes, but recent years it's been very so, and so I've been observing this over the last 10 years. I think this discussion is very much according to party lines, where the KMT emphasizes that it's not necessary to build out renewable energy so much, but we can instead build a couple of nuclear power plants and be done with it and have cheap nuclear energy for years to come, while the DPP has placed their focus on renewable energy.
The DPP has always, I think one of the reasons why they're against nuclear power is also DPP is traditionally seen as more green. The net zero greenhouse emission was just pledged by President Lai by 2050. Is the KMT also pro net zero greenhouse emissions, or how divisive is this issue in Taiwan? Is it as bad as, for example, in the United States? Because the US is pretty clear. The Republican Party, especially now, is still for oil and gas. But is the conversation similar or different over there?
I think that conversation is different, and that is because Taiwan's position in the supply chain. KMT is also somewhat seen as the party that is business focused and business promoting, and I think they're sensitive to the needs of business, the need for business to be able to show that they can produce sustainably or with renewable energy to be competitive in the supply chain is something that I feel they've also picked up on, and I don't think there is a outright rejection by the KMT on the topic of renewable energy. So there's definitely also support there.
So it's not as if, the KMT is against using renewable energy.
I think basically not, but often discussions on specific projects or specific initiatives are following party politics. So if I talk specifically about an onshore wind project, you will often see opposition from KMT side because the DPP is supporting it. This is something that you'd see on the ground. So it's not that the party line is we don't support renewables. We know that it's necessary, but you often see that because one party supports it, the other party says, no, we don't want this initiative because this is not needed.
There are nuances and it depends on the details, right? So can you give one example where it becomes a pure partisan issue, even though on the surface is something both sides agree on? Is there an example like that?
Most familiar with onshore wind, so I'll talk about that. There are projects on Bonghu Island, which has very good wind conditions, enviable good wind conditions. And there are several initiatives to have wind projects there. And there you see that these initiatives are often stopped or delayed as soon as the magistrate, the county government is from a different party. So you see that it's very much dependent on which party is in power on Bonghu, on whether these kind of initiatives are being put forward or not. The arguments are no matter what technology or no matter what project you're building, there's always a way to come up with arguments against it. The method that you often see is that a developer goes into a community and tries to and gets actually a lot of the permits for onshore wind farm. But it often ends up with protests that are then published in the media and where the government then gets cold feet and said, okay, we will not support this project and we will not release the permit, even though a developer has done a lot of the homework in advance and gone through the environmental impact assessment and have a lot of the permitting completed. And at the moment that they've completed that whole process and that the project almost starts, they are at their most vulnerable. And that is these projects get politicized. On the one hand, I can understand that it's that moment because people see that something is going on. But on the other hand, it is the highly visible moment or window of opportunity for opposition party to speak out against this development, mobilize their supporters, bring them to City Hall and have a demonstration there. And then.
But I'm going to challenge you, right? Because that everywhere in the world in terms of local communities unhappy with the developers. So the question is, did they do enough education outreach to the communities, explain to the people before, so to make sure that there's not going to be this kind of protest?
What is enough? Because that's exactly what you're saying is also what often the argument is there's not enough communication. I know that particular project had an employee stationed at the village there to communicate with the residents for 2 years. And every couple of weeks, they would organize trainings and classes for residents to teach them on the benefits of this wind farm. So how much can you reach out? I agree with you that protests happen everywhere. They happen in Europe. What I find in Taiwan, which is a bit worrying to me, is that this always leads to cancellation of the project, which is not what I see in Europe. Yes, you have protests, it goes to court, and the project can proceed when it has been planned. But what you often see in Taiwan is that there are protests, authorities get cold feet, and they don't release or withdraw your permit. There have been examples of fully permitted projects where the construction has already started. And as soon as protests happened, authorities ask the developer to stop construction and move the equipment from. So that's very, in my view, that's very politically motivated.
How can Taiwan get to net zero?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's also my biggest concern, because if you are not willing to really be strong on what you are intent to do, and if you're not willing to go all the way, then that's going to be very hard. One thing that we've consistently have been asking the government to do is it's okay that you put in a lot of hurdles and a lot of permits for these kind of developments. That's fine. I think that's the developer's obligation to go through. Um, give some certainty to the developer on whether that project can be developed. And in particular, we would ask or would invite the government to find areas where this kind of developments can actually be done. So if not there, then where? And this zoning, I would call it green zoning. This is something that is very common in Europe, but you don't see it here. Developers have to find the location by themselves and then by trial see if this actually gets through the permitting process. And very often it's a very lengthy process which can end up in failure in the end. And that's now frustrating a lot of at least the onshore and also the solar effort.
So, what is the government doing since they're pretty committed to net zero as well?
So recently, that's a question of the industry that everyone has. So we feel that there's very little getting done currently. Maybe since energy policy is under the Ministry of Economic Affairs, it could be that the Ministry of Economic Affairs is distracted by what's going on in geopolitical sense or the tariffs. But we see very little push on the renewable energy development side. So no matter it's onshore wind, it's solar or offshore wind, even geothermal, we see headway being made there. Offshore wind is waiting for the next auction. So offshore wind, in a sense, has this green zoning. The government allocates areas for them to develop, so they have a more certainty about the development that they can do, but they have to go through this auction process, and these auction processes are currently pending. We do not know.
Do you think it's also related to Taiwan buying more LNG from the US? It seems that there's a push for Taiwan to purchase more LNG from the US.
Yeah, definitely. So LNG will play a very important role in Taiwan anyway. I don't think this will affect the renewable energy build out. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we are at 10% renewable energy as part of the total energy generation. That's far from enough. We are supposed to be at 20% soon. Energy is going to pay a big role at least until 2050, which time the renewable energy build out should be more or less complete. We have to go to somewhere 60%, 70% of renewable energy. So at least from now until 2050, LNG is going to play a huge role, since it will cover the switching off of the nuclear power plant, plus the phasing out of coal-fired power plants, which are just too polluting and not acceptable for.
So in a way, the proportion of using LNG will increase to replace nuclear power as well as coal as part of the overall not renewable energy.
And Taiwan purchases huge quantities of LNG. But Taiwan is 97, 98% dependent on imports of energy. And I believe they buy LNG from Qatar, but the US could be just a shift of where the LNG comes from.
In recent years, and including the latest referendum on whether to relaunch the recently shut down nuclear power plant was voted on, even though it didn't pass because the threshold requirement was pretty high. But it sounds like a lot of Taiwanese people now feel there's a need to continue using nuclear power plants. So what is the reason that people change their opinion about nuclear power?
Nuclear has done a lot to promote or market nuclear energy as an option. Again, that's one thing. It's been repackaged. A lot of information and news on the small the small modular reactors. This has been packaged as an idea where you have small size nuclear power plants that you can just move around and very quickly build out. Perception has changed, and that there is a renewed interest in nuclear energy. I think that's fine, but I do think it's going to be somewhat disappointing. An SMR is still basically just a nuclear power plant. It's going to take years to build, and it's not said that it's going to be at the cost that is often mentioned of, in Taiwan it's $1 or $2 or very low cost of generating energy. I don't believe that that's possible with the new facilities that you're going to be building, and it's going to take many years to build it out. Nevertheless, I think it's good to have the discussion on it, what role they can play in Taiwan's energy production. I think that's a very valid thing to do. But somehow I worry that, and that's behind the referendum, that it's seen as an alternative. Public opinion shifts towards something that could be a perfect solution for everything, and that's not going to be it. It's going to be part of a package of Taiwan's energy solution, but it's not going to solve all of Taiwan's energy challenges.
Can you explain more about this referendum? What's behind it and what prompts it? And also, what are the newer arguments about the need to continue using nuclear power plants? For example, is it because of, a potential blockade in the case of China trying to do something to Taiwan? Is it because of the AI boom? Like, what are the arguments against?
I think all of the above, probably. It is said that when you produce larger quantity of your electricity with LNG, you're very vulnerable to a blockade. We would have only a few days of reserve, and if there is a blockade, we will run out of electricity very quickly. To some extent, nuclear could probably be helpful, but then in my opinion, by centralizing generation in such vulnerable locations as a nuclear power plant, you also make it a very vulnerable target for yourself, for someone to frustrate your electricity production. So that's probably not it. I think the main argument is, and that's definitely something that will convince voters, is it's cheap. So what the KMT consistently has been saying, that if we turn on the nuclear power plants, it's going to cost only $1 or $2 per kilowatt hour. That's not sure whether that's the case, but that's definitely something that's very sensitive with voters, because electricity prices. So remember, in the beginning, I said Taiwan has an electricity monopoly. Prices have been controlled, fixed for a very long time. Taiwanese are very used to very low electricity prices. Prices have been going up recently, and as in other areas of the world, renewables are often being blamed for that, in my opinion, incorrectly. That the idea is that, okay, we're doing all these renewables, we have to keep electricity prices affordable. Nuclear will be a solution for that. I think this is probably the number one motivation between people coming back to support nuclear again.
So since the shutdown of nuclear power plant in May, so are you saying the electricity prices have gone up? Is that directly?
Electricity prices are controlled because Tai Power is a government monopoly, and basically the government decides what the electricity prices will be on a yearly basis. So you wouldn't see an immediate impact as you would see in a free market system, as in the US or in Europe. It will.
So then what is the argument to say that the prices will go up when the power plant is closed? If the prices are controlled, how do they convince people?
Okay. Tai Power has been losing money. The storyline of renewables being responsible for the price of electricity is something that you see globally, and that's present. You see that in the news. It's being reported. At the source of that is the price of some renewables. So offshore wind is relatively expensive. It will cost you $5 to $6 per kilowatt hour. And people will see that, and they will have an impression, and they will apply this sticker to all renewables and consider them that expensive. So there comes the impression from that renewables are contributing to the increase of the losses of Tai Power. So Tai Power has been losing money over many years already because of that system where the government keeps electricity prices lower. And at the same time, Tai Power has seen increased cost, of course, partly due to these renewables that have an expensive feed-in tariff, but also partly because of energy prices have increased. It just costs more to buy your LNG than it costs to buy oil. So this is also a big contributor to the electricity prices. So the government has been trying to increase these prices slowly as they can control it.
You mean increase they're charging the people, even though they control it, but they're still slowly transferring that additional cost to people.
Exactly. And that would be that. I think that's a very correct policy because first of all, you want to reduce the losses of Tai Power. And secondly, with higher prices, it will encourage energy efficiency initiatives. And especially in the past, because prices have even been lower in the past, that there was no incentive to go for energy efficiency because consumers would not save much money with that. So I think an increase of prices is valid.
Taiwan is going to purchase more LNGs. What are the implications for Taiwan?
Yeah, I guess that the biggest implication is that they have an opportunity to buy it from the US. That's an important asset for the government. As we discussed before, there is a large need for LNG because 50% of Taiwan's energy production is going to be by LNG. So there is a big need for this source of energy. Currently, it's coming from other sources than the US. Taiwan has the option to purchase that from the United States in the future. Taiwan, it will mean that energy prices will increase because LNG is replacing coal, which is a cheaper source of energy. But on the other hand, on the upside, it will contribute to better air quality. And we have been seeing that now that we have the shift towards LNG, that the air quality, in particular in the middle and south of Taiwan, has somewhat improved.
And how does Taiwan stack up with other countries in terms of its renewable energy use and, its progress towards zero emissions?
So my view on the current situation in Taiwan is that Taiwan is far behind. We are not making our targets that Taiwan.
Behind whom?
First of all, behind its own targets. We have only achieved 10% renewable energy content, while we would have wanted to be by this year at 20%. If you look at the countries around us, Korea, Japan, they are currently at 20% or more renewable energy content. So we are lagging behind these two countries. You look at the entire EU, the EU is at 35% renewable energy content. So we're definitely far behind.
It sounds like the government is also not pushing it.
Yeah, so in particular in the last year, we feel as an industry, nothing is moving forward. So we don't see any clear initiatives to move technologies forward. Maybe a little bit on geothermal, but that has also just been marginal. So the auctions of offshore have been postponed. For photovoltaic, we don't see much new incentives there. For onshore wind, it's almost like it's actively being discouraged because this year, zero projects have gotten permitting. And geothermal is trying. The installed capacity is very small at this moment. So we see very little moving.
And is that being criticized by the opposition?
The opposition has the view that, again, the discussion is largely about nuclear. So the opposition will challenge the ruling party on extending the life of nuclear power plants.
But they wouldn't challenge the government for not meeting its own commitments to.
My observation, the argument is, see, your renewable energy plants are not working, but choose nuclear.
Is there any opportunities right now for renewables in Taiwan? How much do you think is also because the US is changing its tone?
I think it's very difficult for anyone to see how that will affect the global situation. The one thing I'm very concerned about is what has happened to offshore wind in the US in the past months, where the Trump administration has stopped projects. This may have a global ripple effect because that will increase the perception that these are risky projects and will increase the cost of financing for the developers, and also will affect those developers that have financed the project partly themselves and their bottom line. So this is a big concern there. And these developers, in particular Ørsted or CIP, they're also active in Taiwan and have huge offshore wind projects here. So that could have a ripple effect on Taiwan as well. But whether that will change Taiwan's renewable energy ambitions, it's hard to say. I still trust that there is a need from the supply chain first to move forward with renewable energy, because that's what many consumers are asking for. And another factor, we haven't talked about that, but that also plays a role in Taiwan's renewable energy ambitions, is Europe's CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So the carbon tax basically that the EU is going to introduce on imports, that is also something that will affect Taiwan's supply chain. So in the future, Taiwan's manufacturers will have to show the carbon emissions that are released due to the manufacturing of their products, and there will be a tax on that if not taxed in Taiwan. So that will still incentivize countries like Taiwan, which are very much relying on manufacturing to maintain their carbon reduction efforts and renewable energy deployment efforts.
It sounds like those regulations and requirements do play a major role in helping to incentivize the use of renewable energy. But the lack of this requirement from the US certainly will also have some impact, right?
I'm not a US expert, but we'll have to see what and still happens on the state level.
Well, thank you so much. Taiwan's domestic politics has become so polarized that even broadly beneficial policies, from defense spending to renewable energy investment, struggle to move forward. Bart Linssen's experience with wind farms captures the dilemma of an island that imports almost all its energy and must balance short-term security with a long-term shift to renewables. For Taiwan's resilience, whether in the context of geopolitics, climate, or the semiconductor supply chain, Bart offered a grounded, inside view of the trade-offs ahead. This is Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we analyze the policies and political strategies of Trump 2.0 and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. Thank you for watching and listening. We value your feedback. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast. See you next time.